The rule of contrast paints from the previous episode corresponds with the character's utmost subjectivity. If contrast paints is the sign of life where everyone has good and evil sides, then, respectively, we should stick to subjectivity, as people tend to live subjectively thinking. Actors live as a medium of radical subjectivity. During the first stage of the play's analysis, along with directors, they dive into the piece's world both objectively and scouting subjectively. But after that, actors must become an artistic unit of subjective sensuous logic. In composing situations that make up the content of this task, the criterion of the character's subjective logic and justifying of what is happening by it is a mandatory condition. People always act according to their subjective logic, which is inseparable from a person's specific personality and everything that is included in this concept and defines it. Just sometimes this subjective logic is understandable to those around, coincides with their mass stereotyped images, and then it acquires seeming objectivity. In other cases, in contrast, it comes into conflict or strife against the other's logic's stereotype, and then a person's behavior seems illogical, and their actions are paradoxical. To explain a person means to unravel and understand their subjective logic. Alas, this complex process of comprehending deeply subjective motivations of human behavior is often replaced by the cutting of a telegraph pole from a ramus or even a gnarled tree of the human soul. Dialectically contradictory, always unique and inexhaustibly interesting by this uniqueness, a person is adjusted to, so to speak, an average person, generated by stereotyped images and acting under the principles of some objective logic. Nonsense. But here we are trying to explain the actions, the text pronounced by a character from the standpoint of some kind of objective logic. Whose? Nobody knows. Your own, obviously. But in no way a given distinctive person with a spatial range of given circumstances. Only subjective logic and no other one exists and can exist in life. We measure human behavior up and plan this behavior from the standpoint of some averaged, impersonal, abstract logic. This drives us into a dead end of monotony and unemotional capture of man's emotional nature. A person generally, not a given, specific, unique one. Directing very often intellectualizes about the people inhabiting a play as some kind of robots with a set program that confirms the director's concept. A person, alternatively, is exclusive and inimitable, and therefore is quite often unpredictable. A work of art is dead if it depicts life just in order to depict life, without any powerful subjective impulse, which has its origin in the prevailing thought of the era, if it is not a cry of compassion or a dithyramb of delight, if it is not a question or an answer to a question. Quite the opposite. Directors must think objectively and subjectively all the time, equally intensely. That's one of the trials being a director. The thing is, the switch between objectivity and subjectivity is of enormously short period. The switching frequency is extra high. To understand, to study, and most importantly to feel the people inhabiting a play, to understand the reasons why this or that act, phrase, word is born, is a challenging, painstaking work, still endlessly exciting. This stage of a director's work is similar to that of an investigator. Indeed, just as an investigator restores the entire history of the case under investigation, all its circumstances and the actions of its participants, by scattered traces of events, collating witness statements and material evidence, so the director, following the author of the play, restores the lives of the characters, the circumstances that led them to the events taking place in the play, and finds explanations for them. But there is also a difference. The investigator drives emotions away. It is important for him only to establish a chain of facts with maximum objectivity. It is up to the parties now, the prosecutor and the lawyer, to explain and interpret the motives of actions. The directors, on the other hand, scrupulously studying the facts, mainly seek to figure out their psychological and sensuous motivation. And for the time being they are obliged to be lawyers of all the characters. Surely, in substance, any person under each of their actions brings one or another explanation that justifies this action, and any person is convinced either of their right to do this and not otherwise, or they are looking for an explanation why they are bound to act so. We call this the subjective truth of the image. Finding out and understanding the subjective truth of each character in the drama is the main goal of this stage in the analysis. And this means to get into their skin, to live with their feelings and then be able to explain them from inside, not from mine, but from their point of view. Apart from my will, one character generates my sympathy, the other hatred. For the time being, I direct my will not to judge or defend my heroes, but to understand them. A play and nothing else. To grasp it, to pierce into it, to let it pass not only through the mind, but also to live through the passions of the characters, to see them not from the outside, but from the inside. From the inside. This is of primal importance, because often we, directors and actors, analyze the life of characters, their behavior, from the outside as well, according to the principles of some kind of universal human logic. There is no such, this abstract logic. Human behavior is justified by absolutely subjective motivations and therefore expresses subjective logic. One of our first tasks is to unravel the motives and reasons that form this subjective logic. And it is possible only from within, that is, with a combination of understanding by reason and testing by feeling. The awakened imagination should make me, the director, not only picture what is happening in the play as if in real life, but also live through, that is, feel it deeply as the events of one's own life. It means that directors do the actors' typical stuff, transfigure into artistic image to some extent. That's when they got the right to create together with actors. The ability, desire, and moreover the need to understand a person not from the sidelines but from within the person themselves, from the position of their subjective truth, and therefore the motives of their joy and pain, are associated with empathy. And without it there is no psychic transfiguration, which is so critical for the director. Empathy is the ability to put oneself in the other person's position, not only to understand but also to feel pain, or more broadly, the feeling of another person. Alternatively stated, to understand the subjective truth of another person as your own. However, for this purpose we must understand the full sum of their given circumstances. And the more we apprehend these other people's given circumstances by feeling, the deeper and more accurately we will pierce into the strange life of the human spirit. And what this is, if not a director's transfiguration? It differs from the actor's transfiguration in the way it is mental, albeit with the participation of all feelings. I will shed tears over figment. The mainest secret of true direction is to unfold the people acting in the play, not from an abstract conceptual position, but from within each character according to the principles of their subjective truth, and in view of this, from the inside of the play and according to the author's rules. A real miracle in working with actors occurs when the director can talk to them from the perspective of the nature and subjective truth of the character played by the actors. In this regard, directors themselves must acquire this truth and this nature, that is, master the art of transfiguration perfectly. So, we came from subjective truth to higher levels of directorial work and art itself. The analysis is deep drilling. It is no coincidence that Stanislavski speaks of the layers in the analysis, where the top, most accessible one is the factual storyline. But the analysis should only begin with this, and it is not at all its ultimate goal to learn the progression of the factual storyline, the period of getting the feel of the play. Think about the words getting the feel of. It is settling oneself into the play. To settle in it and live there with those who inhabit it, and live in each of them. It means to experience along with them, to worry, to be stricken with their pain, to rejoice, to be upset, to fight for the subjective truth of everyone, so that their life becomes, as it were, a tangibly perceived part of the director's own life. Speculativeness, rationality, heart's cold are the most terrible enemies of the humanity in our profession. The one who falls into calculating the life of the human spirit, relying on technology and bungling mechanical equipment, kills the true meaning of the theater. Whatever we explore, our instrument is feeling. Exploring with feeling and testing with mind, not the other way around. And every our knowledge associated with the play is truly productive only when it equips us not only with comprehension, but also with the feeling of the play's events and of everything that is contained in it. Explanation of facts, events, actions suggested by a playwright from within the nature of the characters according to the principles of their subjective truth at the behest of their core, and therefore according to their exclusive and unique logic. This is what most important, the key priority in the art of directing for me is. Everything else in our profession is just a means to make this explanation as expressive, imaginative, and spectacular as possible.